He was the richest man in the entire East. Thousands of sheep, thousands of camels, a house full of sons and daughters, and a reputation so clean that the text says there was no one on earth like him. And then, in a single afternoon, all of it was gone. Not slowly, not over years. In the space of a few minutes, 4 messengers ran to him back to back to back, and each one had watched something die. His oxen gone, his sheep burned, his camels stolen, and his children, all 10 of them, crushed under a collapsing house while they ate dinner together. By nightfall, the greatest man in the East was sitting in a pile of ashes, scraping open sores off his own skin with a piece of broken pottery, while his wife stood over him and said the cruelest 4 words in the book: "Curse God and die." You'd assume a man who loses everything would at least be told why. Job never was. The reader is told exactly why this happened. There was a conversation, in a place Job couldn't see, between God and an accuser, and a wager was made over Job's soul. But Job himself dies at the end of this book, never knowing that conversation ever took place. So who was the accuser standing in God's court? Why would God agree to a test like this on a man he calls perfect? What are the 2 monsters God describes at the end, Behemoth and Leviathan? And when Job finally demands an answer, why does God refuse to give him the one thing he's begging for, an explanation? This is one of the oldest books ever written, older maybe than Moses, and it asks the single hardest question a human being can ask. Why do good people suffer? To find the answer it actually gives, we have to go back to the land of Uz. Let's get into it. The book opens with a strange, almost deliberate vagueness. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That's it. No date, no king, no mention of Israel, no mention of Moses, no mention of the law or the temple or the covenant. Uz is somewhere east, out past the edges of the world the rest of the Bible cares about, and the story just drops you there, in the middle of nowhere, with a man we're told almost nothing about, except one thing: his character. And that vagueness is your first clue, because it's part of why many scholars think Job might be the oldest story in the entire Bible. Look at how the man lives. He isn't a priest, and he doesn't go to a temple. He offers his own sacrifices for his own family, as the head of his own household, exactly the way Abraham and the patriarchs did, long before there was ever a priesthood or a nation of Israel. His wealth is counted in livestock, not coins. He lives 140 more years after the story ends. Everything about the setting feels ancient, pre-Israel, older than almost anyone else in Scripture. So hold that, because it matters. Whatever else Job is, it may be the human race asking its hardest question at the very beginning of the record. Not late, not after centuries of theology had smoothed the edges off. Early, raw, before anyone had comfortable answers. Now, the character. The text stacks up 4 descriptions of Job, and they're deliberately overwhelming. It says he was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. 4 phrases, and they don't leave much room. This is the text going out of its way to tell you something crucial, and you need to hear it clearly because the entire book depends on it. Job did nothing wrong. Whatever is about to happen to him, it is not punishment. The story tells you that on the very first line, so that you can never once believe he deserved it. And then it shows you his life: 7 sons and 3 daughters, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a household of servants so large the text says he was the greatest of all the people of the East. In the ancient world, that's not just rich, that's a dynasty. 7 sons was considered the perfect blessing, completeness itself, and Job had 7 sons and a fortune to match. He was, by every measure the ancient world had, a man God had obviously and lavishly blessed. But hold on to that word, blessed, because far above all of it, in a room Job will never see, that same blessing is about to be turned into the evidence for a case against him. The conversation that decides his entire life is about to begin. And that's exactly the assumption this book is about to detonate, because everyone in the ancient world, including Job's own friends, believed one simple equation: good people prosper, wicked people suffer. If you're blessed, you must be righteous. If you're suffering, you must have sinned. It was the deepest, most obvious rule of how the universe worked. And Job's life, at the start, is the perfect proof of it. The best man alive has the best life alive. The math works. But watch what Job does with all that blessing, because it's the detail that turns him from a rich man into a haunting one. His grown children liked to throw feasts, going from house to house, celebrating. And every single time the feasting ended, Job would get up early in the morning and offer a burnt sacrifice for each one of them. Not because they'd done anything wrong, but just in case. The text quotes his exact thought. "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Sit with that for a second, because it tells you who this man is at the core. His devotion runs deeper than outward behavior. He's a man worried about the hidden condition of other people's hearts. He's up before sunrise, covering his children before God for sins they might have only thought. The text says he did this continually, all his days. That's not a man performing religion. That's a man whose devotion runs so deep, he's guarding souls that aren't even his own. Remember that image, a father sacrificing at dawn to protect his children, because in a few chapters, those exact children are going to be dead, and the God he's protecting them for is going to allow it. And there's a quiet irony buried in this opening that you only feel later. Job's single greatest fear, spoken right here on the first page, is that someone might curse God. That's the thing he sacrifices to prevent. Cursing God is the nightmare he's trying to hold back with everything he has, and the entire test that's coming, the whole wager about to be made over his head in a room he can't see, is built around one question: will Job himself curse God? The thing he fears most in the world is about to become the exact thing the universe puts him on trial to do. So this is the man. Blameless. The richest in the East. A father so devoted he sacrifices for sins his children only might have committed. Perfect by every standard the ancient world could measure. And that is precisely the problem, because up in a place Job cannot see, that perfection is about to be put on trial. Not his sin, his righteousness. Someone is about to stand in the court of heaven and argue that Job's goodness is a fraud, and God is going to let him prove it. To understand what happens to Job, you have to leave the land of Uz and go up into the one room in this story that Job never sees. Now the scene changes completely, and the camera, so to speak, cuts away from Job entirely. He will not be in this scene. He will never know this scene happened. The text lifts you up out of the land of Uz and into the throne room of God. And what it shows you there is one of the strangest and most misunderstood passages in the Bible. It says, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord." The sons of God, that phrase again, the heavenly court, the divine beings who serve in God's presence. They assemble, like officials reporting to a king, and then the text adds one more figure into the room, almost casually, and the way it names him has confused readers for 2,000 years. It says, "And the Satan also came among them." Now stop, because here is the first great mystery of this book, and almost everyone gets it wrong. In English we read the word Satan, and we picture the devil, red skin, horns, the enemy of God, the being from the New Testament and from 1,000 paintings. But that is not quite what the Hebrew says here. In the original text, the word is ha-Satan, And Ha is the Hebrew word for the. It's not a name, it's a title. You would never put the in front of a personal name. You don't say the Michael, the David. The presence of that little word that tells you that Satan here is a job description, not a proper noun. And what does the word Satan actually mean? It means the accuser, the adversary. Specifically, in the ancient world, it carried the sense of a legal accuser, a prosecutor, a figure who stands up in court and brings charges against someone. So when this being walks into the throne room of God, the most accurate way to understand what the original readers saw is not the devil crashing heaven. It's closer to a prosecuting attorney taking his place in a courtroom. The accuser, the one whose role is to test, to challenge, to bring the case against a human being before the judge of all the earth. This matters enormously for the whole book, so let me be careful and honest with you, because this is exactly where people overclaim in both directions. Later in the Bible, this figure of the accuser develops, and by the New Testament, Satan is clearly the great enemy, the devil. Some readers connect the two directly and say, this is the devil in Job. Others, including many scholars, argue that in this ancient book, the Satan is still functioning as a member of God's own court, an official adversary who cannot do anything without God's explicit permission. I'm not going to pretend that debate is fully settled, because it isn't. But notice what the text itself shows you. This accuser has no independent power at all. He can't touch Job. He can't touch a single sheep. He has to ask God for permission twice, and both times God sets the exact limits. Whatever else he is, in this story the accuser is on a leash, and God is holding it. So God speaks first, and what he says is startling. He turns to the accuser and he brags about Job. "Have you considered my servant Job," God says, "that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" God is proud of him. God points Job out, of all the people on earth, as his finest example, and that is what provokes the accuser's challenge, the sentence that the entire book hangs on. The accuser answers with a question so sharp it still cuts today. Does Job fear God for nothing? Does Job fear God for nothing? Read what he's really asking, because it's brilliant and it's poisonous. He's saying, of course Job worships you. Look at what you've given him. You've put a hedge around him, blessed everything he touches, made him the richest man in the East. Anybody would love you for that. Job doesn't love you. Job loves the paycheck. Take it all away, the accuser says. Stretch out your hand and touch everything he has, and he will curse you to your face. Guaranteed. And there it is. That is the wager, and it is the entire engine of the book. Listen closely, because this is the non-obvious thing. The accuser isn't really attacking Job at all. His real target is the possibility that genuine love even exists. He's claiming that no one, not even the best man alive, actually loves God for who God is. That all faith, all worship, all goodness is secretly a transaction. You're good because it pays. Take away the reward, and every righteous person on earth drops the act. So this was never really a trial of one man. The whole idea of disinterested love, love with nothing in it for you, is what's standing in the dock. And Job is the test case for the entire human race. And then God does the thing that has troubled readers for thousands of years. He accepts. He says, "Very well, all that he has is in your power. Only do not stretch out your hand against him personally." And with that, the deal is struck. Everything Job owns, everyone Job loves, is handed over to the accuser to be stripped away, to settle a question Job doesn't even know is being asked. Now, I know how that lands. It sounds cruel. It sounds like a bet made over a man's life, and you're right to feel the weight of that, because the book wants you to feel it. But watch what the text is very carefully doing. It refuses to let you believe Job's suffering is random, and it refuses to let you believe it's punishment. There's a reason for it. There's a question behind it. It's just a reason Job will never be told. And that gap between what the reader knows and what Job knows is the most agonizing and brilliant thing about this entire book. You are about to watch a man suffer everything, searching desperately for a why, while you sit there holding the answer he can never reach. Down on the earth, it's an ordinary day. The sun is up. Job's 10 children are gathering for a feast, the same as always, the same feast that always ends with their father rising early to cover them before God. Job has no idea that a hedge has just come down. He has no idea anything has changed at all. And that is exactly when the messengers begin to run. What happens next is written to feel like a collapse, and the text builds it with a device so precise it's almost unbearable. 4 messengers arrive, one after another, and the writer uses the same haunting line to stitch them together. While he was yet speaking, there came another. Before one messenger can even finish his sentence, the next one is already running up with worse news. There's no pause, no breath, no moment to absorb a single blow before the next one lands. That's not an accident. That is the text putting you inside the speed of catastrophe, the way real disaster actually feels. Everything at once, no time to stand up before you're knocked down again. The first messenger comes in from the fields. The oxen were ploughing and the donkeys were grazing beside them, he says, when the Sabaeans fell on them, raiders out of the desert. They stole the animals and put the servants to the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you. Job's oxen, his donkeys, and the men who worked them, gone in a raid. And while he's still speaking, the second one arrives. The fire of God fell from heaven. The second one gasps, and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. I alone have escaped to tell you. Some kind of lightning, a firestorm out of the sky, and 7,000 sheep and the shepherds with them are simply incinerated. And notice the phrase, the fire of God. Even the messenger assumes it came straight from heaven, and while he's still speaking, the third one runs up. The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding bands, the third says, and swept down on the camels and carried them off and killed the servants. I alone have escaped to tell you. 3,000 camels, Job's single greatest asset, the backbone of his entire fortune, raided and driven away. In 3 messengers, in the space of maybe a minute, Job has lost everything he owns. His whole fortune, the greatest in the East, wiped to 0. But the text has been holding back the worst one on purpose, because while the third man is still speaking, the fourth one arrives. And this one isn't about property. Your sons and your daughters, he says, were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And suddenly a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead. I alone have escaped to tell you. All 10 of them, every child Job had, all 7 sons and all 3 daughters, gathered in one house for a feast, exactly the kind of feast Job always covered with a sacrifice, killed together in an instant. And here's the cruelty of the timing that the careful reader catches. We were just told that Job rose early to sanctify his children after every feast, terrified they might have sinned. And now they die during a feast, before the sacrifice, before the mourning, at the one moment their father hadn't yet covered them. The story lets that horror sit there without a word. So watch what Job does. Because the accuser said one thing would happen, he said, "Take it all away, and Job will curse you to your face." This is the moment. Everything is gone. His wealth, his servants, his 10 children, all of it, in a single afternoon. If the accuser is right about human nature, right about all of us, this is where Job breaks and curses God. and instead the text says this: "Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground." And notice, that's not stoic. That's not a man pretending he's fine. He tears his clothes. He shaves his head. He collapses to the ground. This is full, violent grief. Job is not okay, and the book never once pretends he is. But watch the direction of it. He fell on the ground, the text says, and worshipped. He didn't fall down cursing. He fell down worshipping. And out of that grief comes the second poem in this book, and one of the most famous lines ever written about loss. "Naked I came from my mother's womb," Job says, "and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Sit with what he's actually saying, because it's more than acceptance. Naked I came, and naked I'll go. He's saying none of it was ever really mine to begin with. I arrived with nothing. I'll leave with nothing. Everything in between was a gift, and a gift can be taken back. He refuses to treat the blessings as things he was owed. And then the line the whole scene has been driving toward: "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away." Blessed be the name of the Lord. He blesses God in the same breath that he admits God is the one who let it all be taken. And the text closes the first round with a verdict aimed straight at the accuser. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Round one goes to Job. The accuser was wrong. Strip away everything a man has, and this man still worships. But a prosecutor isn't finished after one objection. The scene cuts back up to heaven a second time. The court assembles again. The accuser walks in again, and God brags about Job again, this time adding a line that should give you chills. "He still holds fast to his integrity," God says, "although you incited me to destroy him for no reason." For no reason, God himself calls it, and the accuser, cornered, plays his final card. Skin for skin, he says. A man will give everything he has for his own life. You haven't touched Job himself. Stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. And God allows it, with one last limit. Behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life. So the accuser goes out from the presence of the Lord a second time, and this time he strikes Job's own body. Loathsome sores, the text says, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head to toe, covered in open, oozing boils. And we find the greatest man in the East sitting down in a heap of ashes, taking a broken piece of pottery and using the sharp edge to scrape at his own ruined skin, because the itching and the pain have nowhere else to go. And it's here, at the absolute bottom, that the last person in his life speaks. His wife. She has lost all 10 of her children too, remember. She has watched her husband go from the greatest man in the East to this, a broken body on a garbage heap, and she looks at him, still clinging to his faith, and she says the hardest line in the book. Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. Curse God and die. It's the exact thing the accuser predicted he would do, now placed in the mouth of the person closest to him. And it's the exact thing Job feared his own children might do, the nightmare he sacrificed every morning to prevent, now spoken out loud in his own home. And Job's answer is quiet and staggering. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this, the text says, Job did not sin with his lips. He has now lost everything a human being can lose except his own life and his own faith. And he's still holding both. But something is about to change, because 3 of his friends are on their way, and their comfort is going to hurt worse than the boils. 3 men hear what has happened to Job, and they come: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. And I want to be fair to them. because they get remembered as villains, and they didn't start as villains. They travel a long way to reach him, and when they arrive and see him from a distance, the text says they didn't even recognize him. His own friends couldn't tell it was him. That's how far gone he is. And then they do the single most beautiful thing anyone does in this entire book. They sit down. The text says they sat with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, because they saw that his suffering was very great. 7 days of silence. No advice, no explanations, no trying to fix it. Just 3 men sitting in the ashes next to their broken friend, sharing his grief without saying a thing. If the book had ended there, they'd be heroes. The tragedy of these 3 men is that they opened their mouths, because eventually Job breaks the silence himself, and what pours out is raw. He curses the day he was born. He wishes he had died in the womb, never seen light, never drawn breath. This is a man in so much pain. He wants to be uncreated. And that anguish is what finally makes his friends start to talk. And the moment they start talking, the whole book turns into something you don't expect. It becomes a debate, a long, brutal, poetic argument about the one question underneath all human suffering. Why is this happening to you? And the 3 friends all have the same answer. It's the ancient rule we talked about, the equation everyone believed. Good people prosper, wicked people suffer. So if you are suffering, the logic runs backward with terrible force. You must have sinned. Somewhere, somehow, you did something to deserve this. That's their entire theology, and they take turns hammering it at him, round after round, in some of the most gorgeous and most wrong poetry in the Bible. Eliphaz goes first, and he's polite about it. Can you remember, he asks, anyone innocent who ever perished? He's saying, come on, Job, the innocent don't get destroyed, so search yourself. Bildad is blunter. He as good as tells Job that his 10 children must have died because they sinned. Imagine saying that to a grieving father. And Zophar is the harshest of the 3, telling Job that God is punishing him less than he deserves. Their message, underneath all the poetry, is always the same: confess, repent, admit what you did. Because in their world there is no other explanation. Suffering is a verdict, and a verdict means you're guilty. And here's what makes this so agonizing and so brilliant, because the reader is in an impossible position. We know they're wrong. We watched the first 2 chapters. We know Job didn't sin. We know this isn't punishment. We know exactly why this is happening. We're sitting there holding the answer. And we have to watch these 3 men confidently explain to Job that he must be a secret sinner, when we know for a fact he isn't. Their logic is airtight. Their premise is completely false, and they cannot see it, because they are absolutely certain they already understand how God works. Quick pause here, because this is exactly the moment for it. If you've ever been on the receiving end of that kind of comfort, the confident explanation of your own pain from someone who has no idea what they're talking about, then this ancient book already understands your life, and that is the whole reason this channel exists. Every week I take one story people think they've fully understood, and we go back to what the text actually says and find the thing hiding underneath. If that's your kind of thing, subscribe, because it genuinely helps these deeper readings reach the people who need them. All right, back to the ash heap, because Job refuses to play along, and this is where he becomes one of the most remarkable figures in the entire Bible. He will not confess to sins he didn't commit just to make the theology work. He knows he's not perfect, but he knows he did nothing to deserve this, and he refuses to lie about it, even to God. So instead of repenting, Job does something almost unthinkable for an ancient man of faith. He decides he wants to take God to court. Over and over, Job starts using courtroom language. He wants to present his case. He wants to stand before God and argue, to lay his complaint out and demand an answer. He's not cursing God, notice, which is what the accuser predicted. He's doing something stranger. He's holding on to God so tightly that he's willing to accuse God of being unfair to his face, and still refuses to let go. But then Job runs straight into the problem at the heart of the book, and he says it out loud. God isn't a man, he says, that I could take him to court. There's no one to mediate between us. In one translation, he cries out for an umpire, someone who could lay his hand on us both. Job realizes he wants a trial with God, but there's no one who could possibly stand between a mortal man and the Almighty. No referee, no go-between, no one big enough to bridge that gap. And it's right there, at the lowest and most hopeless point of his argument, that Job says the thing this whole section has been building toward. Out of the middle of his agony, with no evidence, with everything stripped away, he suddenly blurts out a flash of impossible hope. It's one of the most famous verses in the Old Testament, and Christians for 2,000 years have read it as pointing far past Job, all the way to something Job could not have understood. I know that my Redeemer lives, Job says, and that at the last he will stand upon the earth, and after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God. I myself shall see him with my own eyes, and not another. Now let's take that apart, because it's extraordinary. The word Job uses, translated Redeemer, is the Hebrew word goel. And a goel was a very specific thing in the ancient world. It was your kinsman redeemer, your closest relative, the family member whose job it was to come to your rescue, to buy you back out of slavery, to avenge you, to defend you when you couldn't defend yourself. Job, who just said there's no one to mediate between him and God, now cries out that he has a redeemer, a goal, someone who lives, who will stand up for him at the last, and that even after his body is destroyed, he will see God with his own eyes and be vindicated. And I have to be honest with you about how to read this, because it's contested and it matters. In the immediate context, Job may simply be crying out for a vindicator, someone, or even God himself, who will finally clear his name before he dies. That's the plain reading, and it lands hard on its own. But Christians, from the very earliest centuries, heard something much bigger in it. They heard a man, in the oldest book of the Bible, longing for exactly the thing they believe arrived 2,000 years later. A Redeemer who lives, a mediator who could lay his hand on both God and man, someone who stands on the earth at the last and brings his people through death itself to see God in the flesh. Job cried out for an umpire between man and God and said it was impossible. And the entire New Testament is built on the claim that the impossible umpire showed up. Whatever you believe, the ache in Job's verse is the exact shape of the answer Christianity claims to give. A grieving man in the land of Uz reached up out of an ash heap for a redeemer he couldn't name and couldn't see, thousands of years before the story was supposedly finished. But even this flash of hope doesn't end Job's suffering or his questions. The friends keep arguing. A fourth voice, a young man named Elihu, even shows up near the end and gives his own angry speeches, insisting God is teaching Job through this pain, and through all of it, God stays silent. Chapter after chapter, Job demands his day in court, demands an answer, demands that God show up and explain, and for a very long time, nothing, just silence from heaven and the endless voices of men who think they've got it figured out. Job wants God to speak. He has no idea that when God finally does, it's going to be nothing like what he asked for. After 37 chapters of human beings talking about God, God finally speaks. And the way the text describes it is unforgettable. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, not in a whisper, not in a gentle word of comfort, out of a storm, a roaring, violent tempest. The God who has been silent this whole time arrives in the one form that makes it absolutely clear who is small and who is not. And here is the great surprise of the entire book, the thing nobody expects on a first read. God does not answer the question. Think about it. For almost 40 chapters, one question has been burning at the center of everything. Why? Why did this happen to Job? We're waiting for God to explain. We want him to say, Job, there was a wager, there was an accuser, you were being tested, here's the reason. God never says any of it. He does not explain the suffering. He does not mention the accuser. He does not tell Job about the scene in heaven. Not one word of the answer Job has been begging for. Instead, God asks Job questions. Question after question after question, and every single one of them is impossible to answer. Where were you, God begins, when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who determined its measurements? Who stretched the line across it? Where were you when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? It's the ultimate reframe. Job wanted to put God on trial. And God essentially says, you want to question me? Fine. Let's begin. Were you there when I built the universe? And then God takes Job on a tour of creation that is honestly one of the most beautiful passages ever written. Have you ever commanded the morning, God asks, and caused the dawn to know its place? Have you walked in the deep places of the sea, or seen where the snow is stored? Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades, or loosen the belt of Orion? He points to the wild goats giving birth where no human watches, the wild donkey that answers to no master, the ostrich, the warhorse that laughs at fear, the hawk, the eagle on its cliff. On and on, a God delighting in a creation so wild, so vast, so full of things that have nothing to do with human beings at all. And notice what all of these have in common. They are things Job did not make, cannot control, and mostly never even sees. God is showing him a universe that is running, vast and intricate and alive, completely beyond Job's understanding or management. And the point sharpens with every question. Job, you can't even comprehend the weather. You can't birth a mountain goat or number the clouds. The world is full of things you don't understand and can't control. And it is still good, still ordered, still cared for. So when it comes to the one thing you can't understand, your own suffering, is it possible that it also sits inside an order too big for you to see? And then, right at the climax, God introduces two creatures that have puzzled readers for thousands of years, and they are the second great mystery of this book. First, Behemoth. Look at Behemoth, God says, which I made just as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. His strength is in his loins, his power in the muscles of his belly. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar. His bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs like bars of iron. He is the first of the works of God. And then, even more strange, Leviathan, a creature of the sea and the deep, wrapped in scales like shields, that breathes smoke and fire, that no human can capture or tame. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook? God asks. Will he make a covenant with you? Around his teeth is terror. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. So what are they? And here I have to be straight with you, because scholars genuinely split on this. One reading is naturalistic. Behemoth, on this view, is a real animal, most often identified as the hippopotamus and Leviathan as the crocodile, both terrifying creatures Job would have known by reputation, wild beyond any human control. On this reading, God is still making his point with real animals. You didn't make these, you can't tame these, and they're a fraction of my creation. But there's a second reading, and it may be deeper. In the rest of the ancient world, and elsewhere in the Bible itself, Leviathan is a chaos monster, a serpent of the primeval deep that represents the raw, untamable forces of disorder. In the Psalms and in Isaiah, Leviathan is the great sea dragon that only God can defeat. On this reading, Behemoth and Leviathan aren't just big animals. They're the embodiment of chaos itself, the wild and dangerous powers at the edges of the world, and God is saying something staggering. These forces that terrify you, that look like pure chaos to you, I made them. I contain them. Even the chaos is on a leash in my hands. And do you feel the echo? Because that's the exact same shape as the very first scene. Remember the accuser, the adversary who could do nothing without permission, whose leash God was holding the entire time. Now, at the end, God shows Job the two most chaotic, most terrifying creatures imaginable, and the message is the same. Even the things that look like they've broken loose, even the monsters, even the chaos are held. Nothing in this universe is running wild outside my control. Not Leviathan, not the storm. And though God never says it out loud, not the accuser either, and not what happened to you. God never explains the suffering. He never mentions the wager. What he gives Job instead is himself, and a universe so vast and so carefully held that the question changes shape entirely. And that is when Job, who demanded a trial, who wanted his day in court, who had so much to say, finally opens his mouth to respond. And what he says is the key to the whole book. Job answers God twice, and both times he's almost out of words, which for a man who has been talking for 30 chapters is its own kind of miracle. The first time he simply says, I am small. I have no answer. I put my hand over my mouth. But it's his second answer that holds the whole book together, and you have to hear the exact words. I have heard of you, Job says, by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Stop on that, because it's the resolution to everything. Job is saying that everything he knew about God before, the sacrifices, the reputation, the theology, was second-hand. It was hearing. Rumor. He knew about God, and now, after the loss and the ash heap and the arguing and the whirlwind, he doesn't just know about God anymore. He has met him. The suffering didn't get explained. It got transcended. Job traded an explanation he wanted for an encounter he never expected, and by the end, the encounter is enough. He says, Therefore I despise myself, and repent in dust and ashes. Not repenting of some secret sin his friends imagined. Repenting of ever thinking he was big enough to put God on trial in the first place. And then comes the twist almost nobody remembers, the ending that flips the whole book one more time. Because after Job repents, God turns, in anger, to the three friends. And listen to who he's angry at. Not Job, the friends. My wrath is kindled against you, God says to Eliphaz, because you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Read that again slowly. The men who defended God for chapter after chapter, who insisted God is just, that suffering is always deserved, that Job must have sinned, God says they got him wrong. And the man who argued, who accused, who shook his fist at heaven and demanded answers and refused to lie, God says he spoke rightly. The honest wrestler pleased God more than the confident defenders. Job, who said hard and angry things straight to God's face, is the one God vindicates. His friends, who said only safe and pious things about God, are the ones who need Job to pray for them so they aren't punished. And that's a mercy hiding in plain sight for anyone who has ever been angry at God in the middle of grief. This ancient book says the honest struggle, even the furious kind, is closer to faith than the tidy answers of people who were never really listening. Job never got the explanation, but he got something the friends never did. He got God's approval, precisely for refusing to pretend. And only then, after Job prays for the friends who wronged him, does the book give you its famous ending. The Lord restored the fortunes of Job, the text says, and the Lord gave him twice as much as he had before. Everything comes back doubled. 14,000 sheep where he had 7, 6,000 camels where he had 3, 1,000 yoke of oxen, 1,000 donkeys, all of it doubled. And he has 10 more children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. And the text does something touching. It names the daughters, Jemimah, Keziah, and Keren-Happuch, and says there were no women in all the land as beautiful as Job's daughters, and their father gave them an inheritance alongside their brothers, which was almost unheard of in that world. Job lives another 140 years and sees his children and his children's children to 4 generations. And then he dies, the text says, old and full of days. But before you close the book on a happy ending, look closer, because the doubling hides something it can't quite fix. His wealth doubled, his animals doubled, but his children didn't double. He lost 10 children and he was given 10 more, not 20. And any parent watching knows exactly why. Because children aren't livestock. You don't replace the 10 you buried by having 10 more. The new children are a gift, a real one, but the 10 in the ground are still in the ground. The book is honest enough not to pretend otherwise. Restoration is real, but it is not erasure. Job carries the loss into his blessing, even doubled, even old and full of days. He is a man who remembers. And here's the final thing, the detail that has haunted careful readers for thousands of years. Through all of it, the restoration, the long life, the 4 generations, right up to the day he dies old and full of days, Job never finds out why. He never learns about the accuser. He never hears about the wager. He never gets told there was a scene in heaven, a challenge, a test, a question asked over his head about whether anyone loves God for nothing. That knowledge is given to one person only, you, the reader. Job lives the whole thing and dies never knowing the reason, and you were handed the reason in chapter 1, which means the book was never really written to explain Job's suffering to Job. It was written to hand you, the person watching, the thing Job never got, and to ask whether you could hold on to God the way Job did, in the dark, without the answer. Which brings us all the way back around to the question we started with. We started with the richest man in the East losing everything in a single afternoon, and a conversation in heaven he was never told about. And when we actually read it, slowly, the story turned out to be almost nothing like the patience of Job cliché people carry around. What we found instead was the oldest and hardest question a human being can ask. Why do good people suffer? Asked at the very beginning of the Bible and answered in a way almost no one expects. There's an accuser in the heavenly court whose name is really a title, put on a leash he can't slip. There's a wager about whether anyone alive loves God for nothing. There's a grieving man who refuses to lie about his own innocence, who reaches up out of an ash heap for a redeemer he can't name, and who wins God's approval not by staying calm, but by staying honest. There's a voice in a storm that answers a question with 100 better questions, and 2 monsters that turn out to be chaos itself, held. And there's a man who gets everything back, doubled, and still never learns the one thing you've known since chapter 1. Because that's the strange gift of this book. It doesn't hand Job the reason for his pain. It hands it to you and then quietly asks whether you could do what Job did. Keep holding on, in the dark, before the doubling, before the answer, when all you have is the God you've finally met and no explanation at all. That's the whole reason this channel exists. To open the book back up and read what's actually on the page, even when the truth turns out to be stranger, or harder, or bigger than the version we were handed. So if this changed how you see even one story, subscribe, because Job cried out for a redeemer who could stand between God and man and said it was impossible. The next video is about the moment the rest of the Bible claims that impossible mediator finally showed up. And the clue to it is hiding in a name almost nobody reads carefully. And the video on screen right now unpacks another mystery buried in these same ancient pages. Go ahead and click it. I think you'll want to know how this one ends too.